Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com.
Welcome. Welcome to everyone listening all around the world, all across the United States. We're coming to you live from the Technocracy headquarters. That's right, which tonight is the Coast to Coast AM studios right here in Los Angeles, California, standing in on this beautiful Sunday evening, Southern California. I am your host, Jimmy Church. And tonight, my guests are on this Veterans Day. I've got Danny Brinkley coming up in a second. Anthony F. Sanchez is here. And we're going to finish out the night with researcher Patrick Wood. All right, joining us now, Anthony F. Sanchez, of course, the author of UFO Highway. But he's also a senior-level technologist and a veteran of Silicon Valley with a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Information Systems. And he's also worked for Intel, 3Com, HP, NEC. And he now develops software. He's got his ghost hunting apps and his UFO apps. He's also got a really cool podcast that he's doing. And on top of all of that, he's a great guy and one of the best UFO researchers and contributors to the community that we have today. I'd like to welcome back to Coast AM, Anthony F. Sanchez. Anthony, how are you, man?
Wonderful. Happy Veterans Day, and thank you for that amazing introduction.
Well, Anthony, you know, you're the best, and UFO Highway has turned into, and you hear this over and over again now, I'm not sure how the book was, first, looked at in the community, but the truth is today, it's one of the go-to books for everybody. Did you expect that when you wrote it?
Way back in 2008, 2009, 2010, when I began the research for the book and began to put together all the data for, the various sections within the book, and this is prior to the Dulce interview happening, I knew that there was enough information in there that ultimately, through various sources of mine and pools of material that I had been working from, that it could eventually, be seen as something that was somewhat prophetic in a way. For instance, right now, we're seeing an explosion of information on Atlantis. And there's a channel on YouTube called Bright Insight, and there's a host. His name is Jimmy, just like you, Jimmy.
Okay.
And this guy's incredible. And one of the things that he has done is he has synthesized a ton of data on Atlantis. And me, as a researcher and author of my book, where I talked about ancient civilizations, ancient historical records, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, I'm just blown away. I think that there is enough evidence right now via the work that has been synthesized by this gentleman named Jimmy at the Bright Insight YouTube channel that proves the existence of Atlantis, where it is located. And literally, we have many scholars over, many, many, many decades saying that Atlantis is a myth, that the stories from Plato and both the Critias and the Timaeus dialogues were essentially just stories. The evidence now shows that it coincides with factual scientific evidence and timelines, not to mention the fact that you can actually see Atlantis from satellite photographs, that being the Eye of the Sahara in modern-day the country of Mauritania in Africa. This is in the Saharan Desert.
Oh, you're talking about the recon structure.
The Richat Structure. Exactly.
Oh, yeah, of course. I've been studying that for years. I brought that up on the show the other night. I don't know if it was last night on Coast or if it was Fade to Black, but I brought it up. But, yeah, you can see it. Who was I speaking? Oh, Randall Carlson and I were talking about it. You can go. What's interesting, Anthony, if you go to Google Satellite and just look at Africa, you don't even need to zoom in. You can see it right there in the middle of the Sahara. It's ginormous.
My God. Jimmy, in my book, in my book, I talk about the Sumerians, right? I talk about the catalogs of their kings or demigods, how far back and gods and how far back it all goes. And I also mentioned that there is now factual geological evidence that shows that the construction of the Sphinx can be dated back to around 10,500 BC.
Right.
By some unknown pre-Sumerian/Egyptian civilization. And this is what gets me excited. There's already strong paleosociological consensus showing that one or two major civilizations existed in the time period immediately prior to the great glacial melt of 12,500 BC. Isn't it funny that we're now discovering all of these locations, like in Turkey? Help me out here. The
Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, right. How could I forget that being on your show? Göbekli Tepe, points right back to that time. The evidence that is being shown here by the Bright Insight YouTube channel, it's crazy because every piece of evidence that they show goes right back to the same time as the Younger Dryas event. And they put all this information together showing that these maps, ancient maps like the map of Herodotus, Ptolemy's world map, they all show an area in Western Africa that is partially submerged and or mentions the location of a place called Atlantis. And I'm just blown away by this information. It's crazy because, for the longest time, everyone has always suggested that the idea of Atlantis was this aggressive, warlike civilization, right? Similar to either Persia or Carthage. And so they assumed, maybe it was the Persians or maybe it was the Carthage. But here's the problem with that. Despite being military powers, with these imperialistic notions, one, they were just not West enough, and two, they were not anywhere near the Atlantic. And then everybody says, but it was the Minoan culture, with the Santorini eruption, where the remnants of the Santorini eruption have left these islands. The problem is that the Minoan culture was a peaceful culture, and again, not West enough, not far West enough. And the timeline is wrong.
Well, what I find interesting here, Anthony, is that we have had researchers for decades, not only speaking about various flood myths in cultures, timelines, Leo, Orion, of course, the great John Anthony West and Robert Schoch and their research into the Sphinx, but everything pointing at this 10,500 BC number. Göbekli Tepe pops up. Now, that is there at 10,000 BC, 10,500 BC. Graham Hancock's new book, America Before, which is now talking about the same numbers here in North America, 10,500 BC. But what is interesting is these fringe researchers were all panned and ridiculed. Science today, and this is what you're referring to, science today is now proving that we've had it right all along. And that's the exciting part. Science and orthodox academia is helping us fringe researchers say, hey, we were right. And we kind of get to thumb our nose at them a little bit.
Right. And I think that the key to all of it is the Younger Dryas event, right? So this is a theory that was introduced way back in 2007 that a comet may have exploded over Canada 12,900 years ago. One, it killed off the Clovis people. All of the large animals, all the mammals, like the saber-toothed tigers, the woolly mammoth, essentially sending the Earth back into an ice age, right? The young and we now have evidence of this of what they call the Younger Dryas boundary, where they find these microdiamonds, which are only produced by something as cataclysmic as a massive comet striking into the Earth. And all of that coincides with Plato's timeline. If you think about it, so according to Plato's timeline for the existence of the destruction of Atlantis, it occurred 9,000 years earlier before his relative named Solon, who existed some 2,400 years ago. That would have put the time of Atlantis' destruction between 11,600 years and 12,900 years ago, which coincides with the Younger Dryas event, which is the theory that the comet had this cataclysmic event occur across the entire globe. And when you look at these satellite images, one of the things that it shows is that there's a pattern of a massive flow, from the middle of the Sahara westward to the Atlantic Ocean.
That's right.
Coast of Africa. That would have been, imagine, if that did happen, at the time of, now remember, this area supposedly was residing atop fertile volcanic land. So sensitive, right? If a massive comet strikes into North America, it will have an effect around the globe. Who's to say that this area that we know had all this volcanic activity, by virtue of the fact that you have the Canary Islands, off the west coast of Africa, which have current all the way back to ancient, volcanic records that we can observe scientifically. Who's to say that this sort of a cataclysmic event didn't cause something to happen in a very fragile sea in the northern African continent that would have caused a massive tsunami and in the span of a day or two wiped out an entire civilization? And here's what's funny. People say, well, how could there have been water in northern Africa, covering, such a large area of what is now the dry, barren desert of the Sahara? Well, if you look at these ancient maps, they show that they show that there was water there. Two, some of the maps don't show what we now see as the far western portion of Africa, because maybe it was submerged at that time. We don't know. But there's a lot of scientific evidence that points to ancient ideas about what that area would have looked like, and they show Africa underwater in a lot of these old maps. They show a wet Sahara with plentiful lakes, rivers that no longer exist, and that's a good point of discussion. The fact that they mention these rivers. They actually found caves right there in Mauritania where there were etchings on the wall from some ancient people showing that there were rivers there, and elephants, and get this, sea creatures.
In northern Africa. And this is
Africa,
this is the for the audience. You can go. It's RICH, I believe, AN Structure. And if you go and do that and head to Google Maps, you can see the location. It's in the middle of Mauritania, and I believe it's it's west of Libya, east of the Atlantic. But this is the thing: when you look at the recon structure, it is so big. It is visually exactly as Plato described it. And it's not hard to visualize the water and the structure. And also, it looks like there was a port. This is my memory, by the way. Anybody can correct me. I'm not asking to be exact or quoted here. But I remember there being like a port entrance on the north side, as well as something that appears to be on the south that stretches all the way west to the Atlantic, and it looks like drainage. It looks like there was something there that reached all the way to the Atlantic, and it's not hard to visualize water surrounding all of this.
Yeah, it's the Richat with a T at the end, the Richat structure. And you're right, there was water to the north of Atlantis flowing from the Atlas Mountains. And there is now evidence, there's satellite photographic evidence showing that they discovered massive ancient riverbeds. And get this, if those rivers were active rivers today, they would be, that river which by the way, which extends from the Nile westward all the way out to the Sahara into Mauritania, it would be the 12th largest river in the world.
Well, did I say recon? You're right, it's Recat. It's been a while since I've looked into it. But also, my memory says that Herodotus mentioned the Nile going to the west and not going to the east originally. Am I right?
Right. Yes, he mentions the Nile going southward but westward. Which people,
right.
The Nile never went westward, but there's now satellite photographic evidence that proves this. Another interesting thing is that the Richat structure has a 28-mile diameter, which matches the description of Atlantis by Plato. This is crazy. It's just there's so much evidence. And again, I'm really thankful to this Bright Insight YouTube channel for putting all of this together.
Yeah, I'll have to go check it out. Go check it out. And again, we're going to head towards a break here, Anthony. I'm glad that you brought this up because it is such a large. It's interesting for me that you can see this from space like that. I mean, you think of like the Grand Canyon. This is bigger, right? It is. It's ginormous.
It's massive. And one more thing too, Jimmy. This is going to blow your mind away. This area has evidence of non-fossilized bones of whales, meaning that this is not an area that had seawater millions of years ago via evidence of fossilized whales, but as recent as thousands of years ago because of non-fossilized, whale bones, right? It's like, you petrified wood, right? A lot of these fossils, they're stone now because of the petrification. But that takes millions and millions of years.
How would non-fossilized whale bones settle in the middle of the Sahara in Mauritania?
Just further evidence that there was a sea there. There was a massive amount of seawater there. And one of the things that they point out to us is that when they dig down for wells around, the outer concentric rings of the Richat structure, it's all seawater. Evidence that there had been a sea there, except for the center island, which, as Plato describes it, there was a well that produced there were wells that produced fresh water. Well, that concentric middle area of the Richat structure doesn't produce seawater when they dig; it produces fresh water.
Yeah, that's what Randall was talking about that the other night. That there were tubes that were producing water underneath the Richat structure. So there's.
And I am so thankful for researchers like Randall Carson and everybody else that has, given us this information, because now we could go back and look at, all of Plato's writings with a different perspective, as if no, this is not a myth. This is an actual ancient human civilization that we know very little about. But there's so much evidence, and I have more evidence to share with you.
Well, let me jump in. We'll take a break right here. Our guest, Anthony F. Sanchez, author of UFO Highway, is with us. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Coast to Coast AM.
To Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.